All right, this is page 12. This is the last question that I'm going to do. And I wanted to do one of these examples of rational versus irrational. The test makers put one of these questions on the exam every single year. Unfortunately, a lot of students miss this question because they make it too complicated. So I'm going to try to simplify this as much as possible. And I'm going to show you the best way to do this question. So let me make this a little larger. And it says 27. So this is a show your work question. So you have to show how you get your answer. So it says, is the product of the square root of 8 and the square root of 98, is that going to be rational or irrational? And then it says over here, justify your answer. Okay. Now, basically, there's two types of real numbers, rational versus irrational. Now, I'm going to try to make this as simple as possible. Now, when you look at a number, if that number has decimals that seem to go on forever, okay, that's one of the conditions for irrationality, for a number to be irrational. The second part is that there cannot be a repeating pattern, okay? Let me repeat that. First thing is if you have decimals that go on forever and there is no repeating pattern in those decimals, then it's irrational. Now, those are the two things that have to be true in order for it to be irrational. Anything else is rational, okay? So let me show you how I would do this question. So you got two numbers, the square root of 8 and the square root of 98. So here's what I would do. I would just enter the square root of 8. So it's control x squared and put an 8 inside and press enter. Now, this has decimals and the decimals seem to be going on forever. But you might say like, well, it looks like it ends, but it doesn't. It's just that the calculator cannot possibly put all the decimals. So if you actually highlight this question and press enter, you'll see that it actually has more digits than up here, but it rounds it off here. So you can see that this has more decimals. But they can only put a certain number of decimals on here without running out of space. So the first condition is true. This has decimals that go on forever. That's the first thing. I'm going to go ahead and press enter, and you see that it rounds it again. Now, the second part of that is, does it have a repeating pattern? Is there some pattern that you can see among these numbers? And there isn't one. What that means is that square root of 8 is an irrational number. So if you go back, what you should do is right underneath the square root of 8, you should write IR, which stands for irrational. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to do that for square root of 98. So we go square root of 98 and we press enter. And again, you get a bunch of decimals that seem to be going on forever. And there's no real pattern among it. It's 899, and then it jumps to 4, jumps back to 9, jumps to 4, jumps back to 9, jumps to 3, jumps to 6, 6. So there's no real pattern there. And because there's no real pattern and the decimals go on forever, we're going to go back over here and we're going to write underneath the 90 square root of 98, we're going to write another irrational. Now, if you just do that, if you just identify that those two numbers are both irrational, that's going to be 1 point. Now, if they ask you, how do you know, you could say something like, well, it had decimals that went on forever and it didn't have a repeating pattern. You can say that. You say you entered it into the calculator, you checked both of those numbers, and it had decimals that went on forever, and it didn't have a repeating pattern. That's how I know they're irrational. You could say that. Now, in order to get the full credit, you got to do this product. Now, and that means that you have to know what product means. And product just means that you're multiplying these two numbers. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to multiply the square root of 8, and we're going to multiply it with the square root of 98, and then we're just going to look to see what the answer gives us. So let's go back to the calculator. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here, and I'm going to copy the square root of 8, and I'm going to go times, and and then I'm gonna go up here and copy the square root of 98, and I'm going to press enter. So the square root of 8 times the square root of 98 is equal to 28 point. There's no decimals here. It's just an integer. Now, so because it doesn't have decimals, and because there's no repeating pattern, then you would say that this number is rational. So what you would say is this square root of 8 equals 28, and that's rational. So your answer would be something like this. The square root of 8 times the square root of 98 is 28, which is rational. And you can say this is irrational, and it gives us a rational number. That is perfectly legit. If you do that, you get 2 points. This is a 2-point question. We should be getting those 2 points. So again, whatever number they give you, it could be a fraction, it could be a decimal, it could be negative, but once you put it into the calculator, if it's not a decimal that goes on forever, and it doesn't have a repeating pattern, then that means it's irrational. Everything else is rational. That's the best way to answer that question. No memorizing a bunch of formulas. All right, guys, that's it. I'm going to go ahead and end this one, and I'm going to put this on my YouTube channel, and then I'm going to send out a link so that you guys, if you want to look at these, hopefully you do, it'll help you for the exam on Wednesday.